Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So welcome everybody to this episode of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at all things of interest in the London market, everything from people, culture, technology and change. This week we got all the usual items, looking at some interesting news. We've also got part 2 of the interview with Walid from Insure Blocks that we need to get into, because that's really good. And we've also got a new item, which is famous Belgiums. So controversial, I know, but we'll have a look at that later on.
And actually, Jeremy, it's famous Belgians.
Oh, is it? Belgians. I can't even.
Yeah, you're grammatically off there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move along. So news of the week. So I'll kick off here. So I've been quite interested in the future of work and the future of cities. It's not a new conversation. I think people have been talking about this. It's dated 26th of March. So what the future of cities look like, but I think it's intensifying as organisations look to either return to work or downsize offices or whatever it is. And there was a couple of interesting things here on BBC as well. And this quote that I picked up, which is from a couple of months ago, talking about a media outlet that used to have 1,400 people coming into the office every day. The last 8 weeks, they've only had 30 people coming in, but the product hasn't changed. And if you think things are going to go back to normal, then you're bananas, which obviously works well for our brand. But I think this position of a few months ago might have shifted, and I think it's complex and it's dynamic and it's different for all organisations. But I think that there are people who work in organisations who want to get back to the office, and if you, I haven't got any research on this, but I think if you look at the younger demographic, they will want to get into the office, meet their peers, and have that, I guess, rewarding and engaging experience that is work when you're young, as opposed to perhaps some of the leaders in organisations that have got nice houses with offices and gardens, who are actually going, actually, it's quite nice not to go into the office. I think there is something there. And there's also this thing around innovation that we've talked about quite a bit. So how do you have those water cooler moments where someone just has an idea, not in a formal meeting, but just walking back to the lift or whatever it is, and just mention something? And I get a feeling that the initial excitement of working from home has ebbed away, and there is fatigue with Zoom and the amount of work that people are doing. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, how organisations move back to working in offices.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the things I said quite early on, which I think is probably true, is that it's very difficult to self-assess and for us all to work out what's really happening. And we're still dealing with the practicalities of the COVID scenario. Those are very practical, difficult issues, obstacles for people to go back to work, for businesses. And I think they create, whether that be restaurants or businesses or anything, they do create fear and worry and anxiety about simply going to work, which was never particularly an issue, certainly not the practicalities anyway. Yeah. But the other thing I'd say is that I've spoken to a lot of people and we've been doing research, and I definitely agree with the burnout thing. I think people are really tired. And the reason for that is I just don't think they get the release, if you like, of the pressure valve that you get at work. And I always thought this, actually, as a person running a business, is that 2 days at home working from home was fine, but the problems and the challenges and the little niggles and things start to build up, and you need to just go out and chat to a few people, have a drink, whatever it is that you do, just to get those anxieties, I think, into perspective. And I think that's been very hard. We found interviewing, for example, on the phone quite difficult because people just don't have the bandwidth to do it. online stuff has been okay, but I certainly get the feeling now that people would like to be back in the office. And I think the overriding area that has been very difficult is sales. I think all people I've spoken to who are in sales jobs are saying that you just can't sell in this environment. It just doesn't really work. If you're selling anything that's more complex than a commodity, it's tough.
Yeah, I was listening actually to a webinar yesterday, not one of ours, but someone else, and I think that they made 2 points. One is whether the decisions that were being made were as good as when you're doing it over Zoom virtually, when you're in the boardroom, because you do lose, even though your top half, you don't get all the body language, you don't get all the nuances of facial expressions and whether people are completely happy with a decision or might have something to say. And they were also saying that the people with the loudest voices tend to be heard. And that's that's always the case. But I think when you're in a room around a boardroom table or around a meeting table, you can pick up whether the meeting is going well or not. Yeah.
And we're also in a state of flux still. So the decisions that you're making, and we're like everybody looking at planning our business, but what are we planning for? We're planning for a scenario where it's sort of a hybrid situation, lockdown versus back in an office. It was easy in a sense because everything related to something we all understood, which is everyone around the world would be in an office or maybe sometimes working from home, but we understood that. But at the moment, we're not able, I think, to pin down the outcomes or the consequences of a lot of those decisions, because you can look forward and say, well, will people still be at home? I mean, I wrote an email this morning to a client saying, well, look, it's still quite tricky to interview and we're estimating forward. And I thought, well, I am estimating forward, but I can't really estimate forward as I normally do because the situation is shifting the whole time. So every decision is contingent upon the situation we're in. And it's an unknown, from day to day, it's unknown. So I think it's extremely difficult to plan, at the moment. And I think that August is seen as a bit of a point at which we're all going to have a bit of a rest, down tools for a few weeks. I am certainly, and I think you are. Yeah. And we all need that. And then September, we'll be back into another paradigm, which will be a semi back to work situation. Now, I'm hoping that that's more normal, but I fear it won't be that normal and we'll still be struggling with this for quite some time. We're always very optimistic as human beings, but sometimes it might go the other way.
Yeah, we shall see. It's an interesting area to watch, probably something we'll go on. Yeah.
And we're hoping to get somebody on to talk about some of this stuff, aren't we? But we're not sure yet.
Yeah, nothing. It's all a top secret. Can't reveal anything. Right, so over to you, Ben. I think you've got some stats.
Stat of the week. Okay, so stat of the week very quickly. It's from Grace Church study. We're starting to get the first data feeds back from interviews and research on our benchmarking studies with placing and producing brokers in the London market. And there's some really interesting findings coming out, which have, I think, quite serious implications. What we're basically seeing, and what you see in this chart here is on the left-hand side, is an NPS score in each of the bars, apart from the top one, represents either a positive or a negative net promoter score. Positive obviously is good. I would really recommend this insurer and go for them. And the negative red bars are obviously, I wouldn't recommend them at all. So what we're seeing, the underlying picture, of course, is we've got a hardening market. We've had players pulling in and out of business lines, appetites changing, and so on. So what this really represents is part way through that process as the market tips what's coming out. So what we're seeing, actually, though, is quite interesting, is a high degree of variability. So a number of players, well, overall, the net promoter score is a 3%, right? That's quite low for any, if you take it across, and this is across all classes, obviously, in all businesses. So, it'll change depending on where we are looking. But the top group is a group of about 10 or 12 players who are actually very positive. And that same picture is replicated within certain classes and so on. But certainly There's a very large group of players, much larger than I would have expected, which are on the sort of negative side of NPS. In other words, brokers are not particularly happy with these organizations in terms of how they've been dealing with their risk placement and underwriting. So that will have consequences. And what are the reasons? Well, as you might expect, appetite for risk is volatile, but really what brokers are saying is that certain businesses have just simply pulled out of classes without even a word of explanation. Responsiveness has got quite poor from quite a lot of organizations. That may be a consequence of the appetite, who knows? So service is dropping, and flexibility, which is also being hit. So when they're looking for some help, and there is an allied one here, which is customer focus, which also comes through. So there's a number of areas here which I think brokers are saying this is not good. We appreciate obviously the market is hardening, but what you can see here is some players are doing really well. Actually, some players have really done well and are getting it right, and they must be facing the same issues in financial terms. And I partly link it to some data that came out from Lloyd's, this week, which was showing John Neal was talking about the variability, if you like, in the profitability and loss making, which we are also looking at in detail. And you see a similar sort of pattern there. Now, it doesn't correlate with this chart at all necessarily, but it does correlate with this idea that, wow, this is an inconsistent market to deal with. And how does it look? If you're a risk manager in the US or in Asia, London's trying to promote its brand. LMG does this, but this sort of inconsistency isn't necessarily good for the long term. Still shows very short term thinking, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on quite a bit. This kind of short-term, it impacts organisations in many ways, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to it again soon. So let's move things on. So we've got guest of the week. Let's play the jingle. I know you love this bit, Ben. Guest of the week. So it's part 2 of our interview with Walid from Insure Blocks. Where we left it last week was Walid was talking about innovation and entrepreneurialism, and we pick it up here where he talks about the unique aspects of being an entrepreneur and how that drives innovation and change.
So there is a network of things that needs to be put in place for innovation to flourish. But there's this one thing which unfortunately I think no enterprise, and that's not at all just because of insurance, any enterprise will have that, is an entrepreneur works extremely hard because they know they've got £3,000 or £5,000 which to build their startup and to live on. If they don't do that, they go hungry or they can't pay their rent. How can you have that same kind of focus when you have your free coffee machine at the office, you've got your monthly salaries, you got your fruit basket, you're safe. You don't have that same focus.
I'm also an entrepreneur, and so is Jez. We all sit here. We know exactly what you're talking about, and that the moment you wake up in the middle of the night, cold sweat at it all. And, I've had a few of those in the last few months. But if you are now, as many people who work in the institutions, the insurance industries have said, well, it's been amazing. We've been able to Zoom from home and, but what I always think is, and you've also got paid, unless you work for Aon, your full salary. And then even when you do work for Aon, you get 5% back on top. So doesn't that in a way sort of, perhaps even now we're talking about reinforcing some of this, how safe we are, even in the midst of a pandemic, we're safe. You're right. The mentality is difficult to change if that's how it is.
I would argue a little bit differently, because I think actually the pandemic has, if you just look at the news, all the layoffs, Boots just recently announced a couple thousand, layoffs. And I'm sure in the insurance industry, a lot of my colleagues, are fearsome, and the Accentures and the EYs, all those guys, are reviewing their budgets. So whilst it doesn't go to the same extreme that we have as entrepreneurs, it does show that you've got to prove your value. How are you self-developing yourself during this time? What new skills, how proactive are you, to demonstrate that you're not just another clog in this wheel, you're actually something a bit special. You
Yeah.
have to get out of your comfort zone.
I talk a lot about sales and how important sales is, and that's really what drives business, and that's ideas and everything else. And it's hard sometimes, I think, for underwriters in particular, because they don't often meet customers, particularly in the wholesale market. And to this point about security and safety, I mean, the research we've done through the COVID period has said that brokers have been the first to say the biggest issue is potentially job losses. So to me, the people who are closest upstream to the customer are more aware of what you're talking about, the entrepreneurial fear factor that is healthy if it's done in a, moderately, I suppose, and not healthy if you're really just terrified the whole time. So it feels to me like, you're right. I would agree with you. I think there is a lot of fear, but sometimes it's kind of theoretical, isn't it? For some people, it's not going to be me. It's going to be someone else who's going to go. And that's very true of technology, I think, as well, is that people think, well, it won't be me who goes. So this is a long rambling question, but there is a question. What's your sense of the kinds of people and skills and capabilities that, we're going to be needed in the future, as technology does come in, which it inevitably will?
So first of all, you can't have a company that's made just of entrepreneurs, right? You will never have anything achieved, What makes a successful startup is a mixture of skills, right? And a mixture of approach. What binds them together is a shared vision and a shared culture. And I would argue that's what's needed also, within large enterprises, is this shared vision and shared culture. But for those who are willing to take the mantle of some form of leadership, or who are willing to take risk, or who want to experiment, there needs to be a support network, right? And a lot of people, when I have that kind of conversation with them, will say, well, this is just not my stuff. I like things, to be relatively calm, and I don't like taking risks. I'm like, really? So how are you with your first child? Tell me how, how did your nights change? How did your whole life turn around? And that is worse than entrepreneurship, the first 3 months. So you are capable of it. You've demonstrated it. So why not just take the same risk on yourself? And I know this is a bit harsh, but for all those of us who are parents, you will understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It is transformational, and sometimes we get rewarded. We get a little bundle of joy. Sometimes we get a pain in the butt, but it's still, whatever the result is, it's still, very difficult. And I think, taking a risk on yourself in terms of I'm willing to develop, I want to try something completely different, even within my company or with it or external to my industry, go for it.
Yeah. There's a great concept which I actually got from a life coach. Not that I'm listening to life coaches every week, but I do occasionally. And she talks about massive action and passive action. And I think that, what we're kind of often I'm seeing is there's lots of passive action, which is almost lots of planning, spinning wheels, but nothing actually really happening that's very productive. And then what you've described, which is this massive action. And I think actually going back to COVID, that was what I've spoken to quite a lot of organizations about. They said when we had to take this, we were forced to. That massive action actually resulted in great productivity. We mixed it up a bit. There was a big insurer who said that, when India, for example, went into lockdown within about 2 days, they had lots of people who just didn't have laptops and they just went home. So they had to get these huge numbers of laptops, sent around the world to get these people back up and running so they could pay claims and assess claims. But they did all that. And, my little saying has been, if they'd planned, if you asked insurers to plan it, it would have been a disaster, but because they had to do it, they just got on with it. And that's the one big learning I think they probably should be, taking forward if they can.
Of course, it's, to be fair, insurers have demonstrated quite a good amount of resilience, to this kind of situation. Now, unless if I had taken the results of that survey wrongly, but what I understand, there was a vote that was done across the UK that says, if you had a choice to go back to how things used to be, how they are now, which one would you go? And like, a single digit saying, I want to go back to how things used to be. But a similar survey was done with brokers, I think, or insurers within the city of London. And most of them seem to say, I want to go back to, to being able to interact, face to face and so on. And it just seemed like it's such a big contradiction. It's like, this is an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves, to do things correctly. Is it to spend more time working from home? Is it an opportunity for us to be more digital in the way we communicate? Whatever that is, this is a great time to embrace this change. We're not going back to before, because you know what? Our customers probably won't. So do we want to always be the ones trailing behind, trying to play catch up? Honestly, I don't have a huge amount of views. I haven't been tracking it. I was surprised by the valuation, by how far it shot up. I'm sure SoftBank will be very happy after the disastrous year they've had. No, I mean, and good on them, because that will hopefully inspire, other insurtechs, to keep developing, to keep on a challenge, and for the incumbents to interact with them. But I'm afraid I don't have a huge amount to say more than that on that subject.
We've talked about it a bit on the show, and there's a kind of two groups, really, isn't there? One that says it's in valuation terms, it's another failure waiting to happen because there's nothing there, and others say, well, it's the start of a tech, investment revival.
Well, whatever it is, we'll find out in due course. All we know right now, it's got a very high valuation. Valuations, for me, don't mean a huge amount. They go up, they go down. Tesla is at record levels now. Facebook, when it launched, was very high. Then it had a dip, then it went back up. And then, we have WeWork and the whole fiasco around that. We will see. What will keep them in the market is how do they continue to innovate? How do they continue staying relevant, to their customers, and delivering great products? That's all that really matters.
And just generally, because you're in that sort of market, you talked about your own development of business. There does seem to be, and we've had some people on the show who have, basically, they've funded themselves effectively, and others who have been backed. What do you have kind of views on the, some of the models for that and what drives that entrepreneurship? Because I suppose backing might give you a bit of comfort, and
So first of all, unless you've got rich family or rich connections, I would argue most entrepreneurs would start with a very modest budget. That they scrap together. I scrapped £1,500 to get something started, and that £1,500 is here to give me the data to raise £10,000, from friends and family.
Yeah.
And that gives me the data to be able to raise £150,000. So the most I've raised was for Trusted Places, where we raised £1 million. But it started off with 15, then it became 30, then it became 500,000, and then it became, the rest. Yeah. So I only know that approach. I know the approach of funding things myself. So after Trusted Places was acquired, and we made some money, I lost pretty much 3/4 of it in my following up startup. But that's the nature of the game, right? You keep trying. But yeah, the problem is, if you start a startup and you're financed straight away, I would argue that probably puts some complacency in you, right? There's nothing like that feeling I remember with my first startup. I had sold to Accenture, which were my first client at that time. They were client consulting, and until I got the money from that contract, for 2 weeks I was living off pasta, just pasta.
Right.
And when I got paid and I went into the supermarket, and I could buy chicken, I could buy this, it was just so wonderful of a feeling. And that, again, gives you that focus.
It also builds the culture, I think, because if you don't go through that bootstrapping process as entrepreneurs, and you've just got a lot of money and then you make more money on top of that, it's like, well, where's the heart of this? And then you employ people, and people want to know, well, what was the story? And if you just go, oh, well, we borrowed £1 million and then we made 10 million quid, it was quite easy, really.
Yeah.
It's not there's nothing to get behind, is it? Whereas, you talk to me about wheeling desks down Regent Street, you get a sense of, what it's like to take furniture and try and set up an office, and you got something to get behind, haven't you? And that culture element then kicks in, and people get behind it, and hopefully spurs you on.
It does. And, when you look back in terms, of those difficulties you went through, it gives you great pride at the same time, and it provides inspiration for people to join. I mean, a lot of the startups I had built, I had people who could have gotten much better jobs somewhere else, and made a ton more money, but there was the culture. They were like, you know what? Those guys are so committed. I want to join them. I feel as though I'm jumping on the Santa Maria and we're going to go and discover a brand new continent, It's that sense, our ship may sink along the way, but there's a small chance we might just make it. And that's awesome feeling, right?
Something's changing. I had a little anecdote of through COVID where one of my clients called me up and he said to me, Ben, are we constraining your cash flow?
Okay.
And I went, the only answer to this is yes, but how do I say yes? Because I immediately went, obviously he's going to pay me something. This, in a way. So but it was just a great thing to be asked in a way, because I felt almost for the first time in whatever it is, 25 years of running businesses, someone had actually thought it mattered. I mean, I was okay, as it happens, I'll say on the show. And, but to get that recognition, and what it triggers a bit about, and we might just talk about for a second, is this whole idea of different people with different ideas coming together. And something I'm working on a lot now is about collaboration, and the problem of silos and people just not getting what the other people need. But that, unless you get that partnering, it seems to me we're not going to move forward very quickly in a sense.
Yeah, and I think, there's this beautiful section in the book To Kill a Mockingbird when Atticus Finch, is explaining to his, I forgot the name of Scout, I think his daughter, and he said, you got to put your feet into the shoes, of the people you defend. You need to understand them. And, so often you hear of corporates, saying, well, we're going to make that startup sweat, we're going to make that SME sweat because, we're Mr. or Mrs. Big Shot, right? One rule I've always had is always pay SMEs or startups within 48 hours of getting the invoice. I don't care if it was 30-day payment terms. I would pay them within 48 hours because I understood the pain, right? And that's the thing, is that, if you extrapolate from that, if we keep working on silos, you're only going to get siloed vision. You're only going to get siloed results. If you start interacting with other technologies, other partners, competitors, you're going to get a wider view.
I think what you're also talking about here is authenticity and honesty, isn't it? Really? Of course. Which is to say, look, I've been working with a Silicon Valley startup. They had tons of money behind them, but the way that the investors dealt with it was to say at the beginning, you have nothing. So when we started working with them, we did some events and we'd traipse out to Pret a Manger and we'd buy the coffees together and get the event going, and the guy was sleeping on his mate's floor in Clapham, so there was no glamour there at all. I mean, they've moved on now a bit, and they've let the purse strings go a little bit, but it just does seem to me you have to have that understanding of what real business is about in a way. And I think that sometimes in, the big institutions, it's not the institutions themselves, it's just the people within them forget somehow, isn't it?
They do. I mean, you have venture capitalists and you have departments within, large insurers or any large enterprises who invest in startups. What gets me really angry is when those people say, this is what you should do or how you should do it and so on. It's like, excuse me, what experience do you have of building a startup? How many times have you gone hungry? How many times where, you've had to cut your salary to zero so you can keep some of your staff because you've got a sense of responsibility? You don't. So unless you're going to make some valuable introductions, unless you're going to, stump up some more cash and provide some real intellectual property ideas that's going to help my business, don't tell me how to run it.
I completely agree with you. I had a few years ago, I resigned my biggest client, and it was over exactly that. Someone told me, "This is what this is what I need you to do for us, and nothing else." And I said, if I followed that rule, I would never make any money at all, ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Follow the logic, follow the logic, mate. There's no way I can. If every client said that to me, I'd do nothing. I would do absolutely zero.
Of course.
And I resigned. I politely resigned the account. And a year later, they came back saying, "Very sorry, we made a mistake." But it is. You've got to stand up for that sort of thing.
You do. And the thing is, I mean, I remember one of my clients, not in the insurance industry, they wanted to, it was a parenting website, because I've done a couple of startups, and one of them was in the parenting space. And they employed me as a contractor to tell them, what they should do. And I had some ideas, so I built what's called, multivariation testing. I built, many different versions of a site and sent traffic to each. And I basically said, well, this version wins. Show the data points. No, I don't believe it. Excuse me? You don't believe the methodology in terms of how the test was done. No, it's down. It's just, I don't believe the data. I think I'm right. And you get that so often. And if you look at a lot of the new projects or decisions that are made within large enterprises, they would never happen in the real world, right? No VC would give money to something because some guy or some woman says, I've been in the industry for 30 years. I know what I'm talking about. I don't need the data. I'm the data. Like, yes, you're going to spend $250,000 or $500,000 on a market size of what? You, sir, or you, ma'am. Congrats.
So my experience is exactly some of that with data. And the other thing is that I don't believe there's enough people who know how to use data as a tool. They tend to see it as a verdict on them personally. And therefore, that's why they go into this sort of mode of saying, well, you did it at the you collected those data at the wrong time in the wrong place. And just before we got good.
What you should do is ask, people who come on your show, and say, who is responsible within your business team for Google Analytics? Who looks at it every single day?
Yeah.
You'll be surprised how often I was told, oh yeah, Google Analytics, it's in the IT department. Like, it's a business tool. It's not because it's got Google Analytics, it has to be somewhere else. It's a business tool that gives you data to make informed decisions. And that's the key thing, is that we're not doubting your experience. You've got great experience. You've got great insights. Data is a raw material. The insights, your knowledge you have is here to give it meaning, to give it understanding, right? And to put it into a strategy. But you can't fight the data. It's there. It's black and white. There's no, you can, it's not here to contradict you, it's just facts.
It's agnostic, isn't it, as well? That's the thing. It doesn't profess a faith in some way, which I think some people almost believe. I run a business which does independent data, and I have set my stall out by saying it's independent. And I constantly say it's not me.
Yeah, of course.
It's the numbers. But I've had clients who've been, in the survey sense, been very successful for many years, and then they've had a dip. And it's so interesting how human nature still kicks back in to say, oh, I think there's something wrong with the survey. And I said, well, it wasn't wrong for the last 7 years. Yeah, but did you change the methodology? Did you do something different? And it's an incredibly powerful human drive to not believe something if it doesn't, if you're fearful of it, I suppose. But
And we see it every day, whether, before, is the earth flat, is the earth round, or now, is masks effective, against COVID-19 or not? If you put on a mask, then you must be Republican. If you don't put on a mask, you must be Republican. It's this kind of idiotic kind of arguments, with regards to facts. And as I say, it's not just insurance, it goes everywhere. The point is that data is an enabler for you to make decisions. We need your wisdom. You can have 20 or 30 years of experience. If you use data, you're multiplying those years of experience. So it's not here to work against you. It's here to work with you.
I really enjoyed the interview with Walid. It's just it's great to hear those insights, especially the use of data, how it's been, and your conversation around how people feel about it and react to it. It is kind of bizarre. I just wonder whether that will change. Coming back to what we were talking about in terms of going back to the office and what does work look like. And I just think you can play that into the technology and data and analytics kind of revolution, but the evolution of those technologies, and there will be a convergence. This massive change that we've just been through, the technologies that are coming up, the data points that you can now collect, and then how decisions are made and the direction of travel. I just think it's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to listen back to Walid talking about entrepreneurialism, and there's some really great phrases he uses and examples about what it really means, and I wrote down quality, belief, pride, inspiration, commitment, all of those sort of words, but they're all about this, you've got to get something that actually works business wise. And I came in the end to the word commerciality. And I think that's sometimes where businesses lose their way, because they lose that sense of commerciality. And I've realized, listening back to that and some things over the last few weeks, that lots of people are talking about that. So I hope that's a change. Just a final point is, Walid made a point about differences around strategy, I think, between Asia and UK, Europe, and so on. And I think there's another difference which I've noted over the years, which is between, say, the US and the UK or Europe, where I think in the US you have a much more honest commercial conversation quite often. It's more sort of earthy, if you like, if that's a word I can use. Whereas sometimes I think I don't know what it is, there's a bit of status and class and something that operates where we don't really talk about the real business stuff. But I always find it really refreshing just to talk to people about, as I did my example about cash flow, what's really happening, what do we really need to do, and not brush over that stuff, because that's what business really is. And I hope that's more of the conversation when we come back.
Yeah.
I doubt the stuff on data will change. I think people will always, if they get a bad result, they'll always want to get a second opinion.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, let's move things on. So, final item. So, last week you said there was only 2 famous Belgians, and I guessed at Eddie Merckx, and then I couldn't think of the other one. But I've done a bit of research into this, and these are the 2 that I've got. Obviously, Eddie there on the left, and then Poirot on the right.
Poirot.
Yeah.
Poirot's not even a real person; it's a fictional character. But I get you. Actually, I think I've maligned Belgium, because I found some more very quickly. Jacques Brel, Belgian. Didn't know. I thought he was French. Audrey Hepburn, born in Belgium. Yeah. Rubens, the artist, Belgian. Magritte. And my final one, and there are more, but the final one is Georges Remy, who's also known as Hergé, who did Tintin.
Ah, yeah, of course.
So actually, Belgium has been a hotbed of innovation and artistic endeavour.
Yeah. So more Belgiums next week. So looking forward to that. Anything planned this weekend, Ben, before we go?
Yep, I'm going to a wetland centre, which I've booked, and I'm going fishing. So it's a weekend of nature. Excellent.
I'm getting a dishwasher fitted. Oh, I'll tell you about that next week, because it was an insurance claim. There we go. I'll write that down. Indeed. It was actually
good or bad?
It was actually quite good. I'm halfway through it, but yeah, I'll let you know. I'll do a full report next week.
Right.
Good. Right. Thanks, Ben. Have a nice weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one, Jeremy, and everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap up.